All right, welcome to the penultimate week of the year as far as our material goes. We're going to be looking at real estate today, and real estate's a little bit of a different type of investment because a stock you can buy and sell fairly quickly. A bond you kind of buy and hold for a long time. Real estate is not just something that you live in, it could be something you invest in as well. Most of us, our familiarity with real estate is going to be the house we live in, but you can also use this as an investment, either buying rental property and renting it out to somebody else as a source of passive income by purchasing houses, renovating them, fixing them up, and then selling them like you might see on HGTV. That's a process known as flipping houses. That is another way of making money in real estate. And then there's a third way, which is something we refer to as a real estate investment trust, where it's almost like a mutual fund, but instead of buying stocks and bonds, you're buying real estate properties. So let's take a look at kind of what real estate is and how it works. Real estate is anything that involves land and the property that is on land, the fixed property to it. So, for example, your house and the land on it is your real estate. So, a business and the land it sits on are real estate. So, homes, buildings, things like that. And people often say your home is an investment, and that is true. If you own your home, it is a little bit of an investment, but really, your home is a dwelling first. It's a place where you live. You're not necessarily looking to get money out of it. Now, there are quite a few people who will buy a home, hope it appreciates in value, which it usually does, and then plan to profit off of the home by selling it at a profit at some point in the future. So I think that's something that does happen, and I think that's something most of us do. And so when we talk about your home being an investment, that's what we're talking about, that we're expecting the value of the home to go up so we can sell it at a profit in the future. A lot of times then what we do is we take those profits and roll them into the purchase price of a newer and bigger home that we move into later on. So the good thing about real estate is it generally appreciates in value. In other words, its value goes up over time. But there is some risk inherent in that because the values of some properties go down. If there is less interest in the site where you're, the community, the neighborhood, where your property is, the price may go down. If there's a power plant nearby that gets built or something that pollutes the air, the price may go down. The value of that may go down because just like anything else, the value of your property is determined by supply and demand. How many people are willing to offer how much money for it, and you can obviously take the highest offer when you sell. The one nice thing about real estate is, as an investment, it can help diversify an investment portfolio. There's a handful of ways you can invest in real estate. Number one, buying out property to rent it out to somebody else, rental property. And this is probably the most common way people are invested in real estate, that they may buy a second home, fix it up, and then rent it out. And usually the rent is some amount of money that is higher than the monthly mortgage payment on the home so that you can make profit off of it. So if you've got what we refer to as sweat equity, you're willing to put a little bit of elbow grease into fixing up a place and keeping the property maintained, it's a good way to make some additional income. If you're not, that profit you make can get eaten up really quickly in making repairs, because one of the things about a rental property is you're responsible for repairs. So the lease in a rental property is the contract that stipulates how the property is going to be used, for how long, how much the rent is, and all of that. You own the property. You are giving somebody else the privilege of living in your property for an agreed upon amount of rent. And the lease then states the terms of that. There are certain terms that if they violate it, you have the right to evict them from your property. For example, if you don't allow pets in your property, or you don't allow certain uses of your property, then, for example, you don't allow smoking, and you find out that the person has a pet, you find out the person has been smoking, you can charge them for the damages that were caused. For example, you may have to repaint all the walls if there was smoking. You'll probably have to replace the carpet if there's been a pet because of the presence that pets leave, to put things bluntly. And so you can, if it's stipulated in the lease, charge the renter for those damages they have caused because they have violated the lease. If they're not paying rent, you do have the option of not allowing them to stay in your home anymore, because obviously the point there is you're doing it as an investment, and there is an agreement, and again, it's a voluntary agreement. Both sides agreed to it, that the other person, their responsibility is in exchange for the privilege of living in your home, they have to pay you a set and agreed upon amount of money. Now, the nice thing about the lease is it protects both you and them because it's a written contract that you both voluntarily agree to. Your return on your investment is, or what we refer to as ROI, return on investment, is the income minus the maintenance and operating expenses. So let's say that you get $700 a month in rent, but your mortgage is $500 and it costs you maybe $100 to hire somebody to mow the yard, for example. So you're making essentially a monthly profit of $100 on the property. That's your return on investment, plus any capital gains or increase in the value of the property. So if you bought the property, say, for $50,000 and now it's worth $60,000, even though you haven't sold it yet, you can refer to that as your return on investment. You don't, however, the capital gains, you don't make until you sell the property, just like you don't make the profit off of a stock until you sell the stock. You know, you can kind of think of, in terms of a stock, the monthly rent you receive is the dividend, and then you cash out when you sell the property and it's no longer yours, and then you get the full value of the investment. But your return on investment is whatever you make over and above what you paid for it when you sell the property. Real estate investment trust, or an REIT, is a different way to invest in real estate. It doesn't require you to physically buy a property. It's more of a mutual fund for real estate. And one other way you can make money in real estate is by flipping properties, buying things that are undervalued, upgrading them, fixing them up, maybe moving a wall or tearing out the kitchen or putting a back porch on, or, cleaning up the front porch or the landscaping, whatever, and then selling them at a profit. This is really useful if you're willing to put what we refer to as sweat equity into a home, that you are handy enough to, say, replace the flooring on your own, or move a wall on your own, or install cabinetry on your own, rather than hiring people to do so. Because anytime you pay somebody else to do something, that eats away at your profits. And one thing you've seen, especially if you watch these renovation shows on HGTV, and they're everywhere, is that can get really costly. We're talking 5 and 6 figures to fix up a home. So, if you buy a house for $100,000 and it's cost you $150,000 to renovate and upgrade it, you better be able to sell it for at least $250,000 just to break even. And if you're breaking even, what's the point, right? You probably want to sell it for $260,000, $275,000, $300,000 to be able to make profit off of it. So measuring ROI is just simply the current price minus the purchase price plus the cost of ownership and upgrades. So what have you put into it divided by the original price? So for example, your ROI here, let's say that a home you bought for $100,000. It's currently worth $150,000. So $150,000 would be your current price. $100,000 would be your purchase price. And let's say you put $25,000 into ownership and upgrades. So it'd be $150,000 minus $100,000 plus $25,000, or $150,000 minus $125,000, which is $25,000 divided by 100. So your return on investment would be 0.25 or 25%, which is a pretty good return. So that's how you measure that, especially if you're flipping a home. Rental property. When you buy a home to rent to somebody else. And again, this is primarily how people are involved in real estate, is maybe they'll own a second property. Number one, tax savings. Any expenses you put into the home, you can deduct on your taxes as a cost of doing business, because this is technically a business. You file a Schedule C. You can look at the Schedule C. It's pretty simple. But any kind of income you have, you can deduct your expenses from that because it's technically a business. Passive income is income you receive without needing to work. So you're going to be able to get passive income from this because you're not working, but you're able to make some extra money. And usually real estate increases in value over time. So not only do you get the monthly rent, you also have the value of the property increasing, just like a stock. Not only do you get dividends, you also hope to see the stock price increase so that when you do sell, you'll make a lot of profit. Disadvantages. Some properties do lose value. We talked about that earlier. Sometimes tenants may not pay. You may have bad tenants. They may destroy the property. You have to fix it up. You may have to evict them. Eviction is a difficult and expensive legal process that usually involves, you got to get lawyers involved, usually involves a lot of legal fees. There's a court that gets involved. It can be very difficult. So you have to be somewhat vigilant in how you screen your renters to make sure you get good ones, because that is your risk, is that you will get bad renters or people who don't pay or people who trash the property. And now you're on the hook for fixing it, especially if they're not capable of paying for the damages. Also, you don't make money when the property is unoccupied between renters. So how do you become a landlord? Well, number one, make sure you fully screen your tenants. Ask for references, do a credit check. Let them know you're going to do that too. Make sure you budget your expenses. Set aside some extra money for repairs, times where it's going to be vacant, times where you might not get rent. Usually it's common that upfront, the person who signs a lease has to pay the first month and last month's rent up front. So, for example, if your monthly rent is $1,000 a month, that up front they've got to pay $2,000. That second $1,000 is the last month's rent. You pay that in advance. That way you are protected when they decide they want to leave the property, that you've got that last month's rent or you've got any damages that are paid. Because a lot of times that's the one that doesn't get paid because, well, what are they going to do? Kick me out? I'm leaving anyway. So maintenance and repairs, you have to make repairs quickly and timely. You are responsible for repairs on the property because you own it. And so if anything breaks or something, you're on the hook. So you've got to make sure you have a plan for that. Either you do that or you have a contractor you work with that is trusted to, for example, if a pipe bursts, call a plumber and you can send them in to do that. But the one thing too, you've got to make sure that you set aside money for this and bake this into the rent. Don't just go, okay, my mortgage payment on this property is $700, so I'm going to charge $750 in rent and make $50 profit a month. Because if they don't pay you back, if they don't pay the rent for 1 month, well, now you're in the whole $700. And, it's going to take 14 months to make that back up, or you have some major repair. Now you're in the hole. So you've got to make sure that you add in a little bit of extra cushion for that and figure that in before you draw up the lease and advertise the property. Make sure you're communicating with tenants. When I've rented, the good landlords I've had are constantly talking to me. They constantly know what's going on. And, I feel good about them. I've got a relationship with them. And that way, when you are doing that, hey, look, if a tenant can't pay their rent for a month because they've lost their job, whatever, you might be able to extend them some grace or restructure the lease. If you're not communicating, then you may not know what's going on. And that can lead to a pretty acrimonious relationship. Try to resolve disputes informally without getting legal people involved whenever possible. Always check the condition of the property before anybody moves in and then after anybody moves out. Document it with photos. Document it with written documentation. That way, when there are damages that your tenant is required to pay, you can make a claim for those and require the tenant to pay them. In Indiana, if you do not notify the tenant of any damages they are responsible for within a certain amount of time, you must give them the security deposit back. And the security deposit is usually an extra amount of money that is paid to cover any repairs upon the time you move out. And if there are no repairs that need to be made, that deposit gets returned to the renter. And so you have to let the renter know, look, if I'm charging you, say, $500, and you paid a security deposit of $500, so I'm just going to keep that, I have to let you know why I'm keeping it. Otherwise, in Indiana law, you have to return that if you do not within a certain amount of days, which I believe is 60. Make sure you have a clearly defined set of rules, set them aside in the lease, get everything in writing. That's pretty simple. So as far as if you and several others are going in on rental properties, you know what partnerships are. We talked about that way back in first semester. You can also do what's called an S corporation or a limited liability company. An S corporation is a small corporation that passes its net income on to shareholders. It's taxed at individual rates, but the thing is you limit your liability. Your personal funds cannot be touched. Same thing with an LLC. The one thing about those is you have to set them up with your state, and there's a costly legal proceeding that's needed to do that. But it's a good idea to make sure that your liability is limited and your personal funds cannot be touched. So an REIT, just real quick, this is a mutual fund for real estate. Fundrise.com is a good example of an REIT that a lot of people can get into. It takes a $500 initial investment, which may sound like a lot for you, but over time, it pays dividends every quarter, and it's kind of an easy way to get started in real estate investing. And that's not necessarily an endorsement of Fundrise, but just an example of what it is. So an REIT is similar to a mutual fund. Basically, what happens is when you invest in an REIT, you're basically like buying stock in that group, and you're getting together with other people to pool your money together, and then the REIT, the Real Estate Investment Trust, will invest that money in real estate properties. There's two different types. One of them is an equity REIT. It invests in property directly. Mortgage ones generally invest in loans that finance the developments. They're traded on major exchanges like stocks and mutual funds. And so any income they get has to be paid back out to shareholders in the form of dividends. So REIT is a good way to be invested in real estate, which again, generally a good investment because real estate appreciates in value over time in general, not always. Again, there's always risk, but it's a way that you can be invested in real estate without spending a lot of money or having the know-how or knowledge to, say flip a property or manage a rental property. Flipping properties is the practice of buying undervalued properties, fixing them up, and selling them. You see a lot of house flipping on HGTV if you watch that. And so your ROI is determined by the amount of debt carried relative to the investment. So, for example, your original purchase price may not be the original price of the home. It may be what you put into it. So, for example, if you buy a $200,000 property with $40,000, you borrow the other $160,000 to buy the property, right? You get a mortgage and you sell it for $220,000. Well, you've made a $20,000 profit on your investment, but you didn't invest $200,000. You invested $40,000. So now your profit's 50%, not 10%. And so now, anytime you borrow money, and that's what we refer to as leverage, anytime you borrow money to buy an investment, the big risk you run is that the value of that investment is going to be less than what you paid for it, and then you're on the hook for the difference. So if you buy a $200,000 property with $40,000 down, you borrow $160,000, and it sells for $160,000. Now you've lost $40,000. You end up with zero. And you're out the $40,000 you put into it. So you've had a 100% loss in that case. So to flip successfully, you've got to find the right property, real cheap properties, fix it up and add value, and then understand that there are costs of resale. There's costs of fixing it up, new materials, labor costs money in fixing it up, and then understand as well that 7% of the purchase price of any home is going to go to the real estate agent, and always hire a real estate agent. Always, always, always don't do major complex transactions yourself. always hire a real estate agent, but they're going to charge 7%. So of a $200,000 home, the real estate agent's going to get 14 grand of that. And it's still worth it because there's a lot of paperwork. It's a complex transaction. There's a lot of title fees and things like that they can oversee, and they can get everything together in one place. They also have the ability to market the property much better than you can, but you just have to, again, factor that into the price that you want to pay and factor that into your costs. Hey, I know if I'm selling a $200,000 property, 14,000 of that is going to go to the real estate agent. So I'm going to get 186. So is it still worth it to me after that? And, what is the baseline amount that I need to make a profit off of this? Well, if you paid 150 for it and then you threw another 10,000 in renovations, so you got 160 in it, and you sell it for 180, 200, and the real estate agent gets their 7%, so you get 186. You've still made $26,000 profit. That's a good thing. So you've made a significant return on investment. So that's something to kind of keep an eye on. So basically, again, just to recap, in real estate, there's 3 ways to invest in real estate. Number 1 is to invest in rental property, where you buy a home and you rent it out to somebody else. You are the landlord. Somebody else pays you rent to lease the property and to use it for a set period of time. You can invest in an REIT where you're not an active manager, you're a passive manager, but you're investing and you're receiving dividends every month or every quarter from those real estate investments. You're just pooling money with other people, and a manager buys real estate with your money. And then flipping is buying houses, fixing them up, and selling them at a profit. And so those are the 3 real good ways to make money off of real estate outside of your dwelling. And obviously your dwelling, the place where you live, you buy it, you hope it appreciates. At the end of the time you've bought it, you hope to sell it, or you've owned it, you hope to sell it at a profit, and then maybe roll those profits into a down payment on another home that you move into. And so that's kind of the way real estate works. So anyway, hope you have learned a little bit of something about real estate. Obviously, you can always get in touch with me as well. Thanks for watching.